I hope people are having a good week. I am very happy to know that my computer is, I got it fixed, and I am in the process of getting everything put online that was stored in the computer that got broken. Luckily, I was able to uh, put a couple, what's it called? Backup of most of the data, and that has proved to be very helpful. I am working to get on my computer screens set up so I can see everything. It is Halloween, which I think is one of the best holidays ever, where you don't have to go to church and you can still get candy. So I don't see how anybody can disagree with Halloween. What we are going to be talking about today is just again gender and art. Pretty much that's what we're dealing with. But we are going to be talking specifically about portraiture, and ideally self-portraiture. And I have several examples that I wanted to share. We're going to talk about a little bit. We're going to watch a couple videos, and then I wanted to um, show a couple portraits and kind of dissect them a little bit. And I think that the reflection this week is going to be different than stuff that we've already seen. I would like you to find a self-portrait of your own, something that we did not cover in class, and apply the 4 tools of artistic critique to it and see what, if any, gender cues there are. Sometimes the gender cues are going to be completely obvious. Sometimes they're more subtle. One of the artists that we're looking at today is specifically, he does self-portraits that are pastiches of portraits that have already been done by other people, of other people, and he inserts himself into the place of the subject of the original portrait. And we're going to be looking at a couple people that were pretty much examining who they were gender-wise through their portraits. So hopefully we'll get to everybody. If we don't get to everybody, at least it will be in your module, which should be up either later on tonight or tomorrow. Now that my computer is fixed, I'm able to do that kind of stuff. But first, I wanted to talk about just portraiture and standards of beauty. They alter quite a bit. When we look at art from different cultures, we can see that people in different cultures express themselves or are expressed, I guess, differently. I mean, that's just the way it is. Historically, this is something that I think is kind of funny. Every once in a while, you will see people get up in arms in the media. And by the media, I'm usually talking about like social media, something like that. Most of the people that I've interacted directly who are reporters and who have where news reporting is their job, have a lot of integrity and do a good job. A lot of the times when we see things like fake news or distorted news, it's usually related to somebody who is not trained in the journalistic arts and or generally, and they are specifically going after things like clickbait and attention on social media, which is really sad. That's what I've noticed. It's really come to the fore with recent events elsewhere in the world. A lot of misinformation is disseminated through social media channels, and a lot of people don't have the skills for critical thinking that allow them to evaluate what is actual news and what isn't, which is really awful. I've seen in several cases in the last 5 years where people use the same footage to validate their views on either side of a conflict, which is interesting. Anyway, what we're going to be talking about today specifically is, as I said, portraiture and self-portraiture, with an idea of kind of dissecting or evaluating what we're looking at with gender cues. And I wanted to show some images that you may not be entirely familiar with. I'm going to see if I can share. Oh, yes, good, excellent. Okay. I want to share this with you. This is from something called the Standard of which is a really ancient structure that was created and used in ancient Mesopotamia. So this thing is several thousand years old. This shows, well, we're going to look at this one in particular. All right. And I want you to look at this. Now, archaeologists know who this is, specifically because this is of the time period that this was taken from, and the setting, as well as so where it was found, how old it is, all those kinds of things. They have a pretty good idea and know who the primary figure is. I hope you can see my mouse. If not, I'll describe what I'm looking at. What we have here is something called the use of cultural hierarchy or cultural perspective in art, where many ancient cultures, due to limitations in space perhaps, or just cultural conventions, would show people of higher social standing and more cultural importance as being taller than those with less social standing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one person is 8 feet tall and another person is 4 feet tall. What it does mean is that one person is seen as being socially much more important. When we look at this, these two short figures are probably about 5'2" to 5'6" in actual height, and they are male servants. Notice that they're wearing dresses. They're wearing dresses with these kind of feathered edges to them. These two individuals that are seated down look like they're about 8 feet tall. They probably, most likely, are not. They're probably about the same size as the servants. If they ate better, they might be even a couple inches taller. But notice that they're wearing very similar clothing. These are men. They're known to be men, and because of archaeological context and anthropological context. This figure here is tall enough that even though he's sitting down, his head breaks the border right there. So if these are about 8 feet tall, he would be about 9.5 feet tall. There's a good chance he's not. There's a good chance that he is the same height as, or within the same realm of height as everybody around him. But because of the cultural hierarchy and the perspective of size in relation to the importance of standing in society, he appears to be taller. This is the king. And not only is he wearing a skirt like the other four men, his skirt has feathers sewn onto it, so it has even more going on than these skirts do. So this king of a warring, very warlike, powerful nation is wearing a skirt of feathers. And I thought that would be interesting to show you, because these are kinds of things to be aware of when we're talking about portraiture. I wanted to share this as well. This is late 19th century in Iran, and this is in the Middle East. And this is an Iranian princess who was considered to be so beautiful that no fewer than 13 men whose advances she rejected went home and killed themselves, because they just could not imagine living without her in their lives. And this is a close-up. The standard of beauty at the time meant that women needed to have a little bit of fur on their upper lip, and her eyebrows, both for men and women, needed to come really close together, if not touch over the bridge of the nose. And this is how she looked with her. Uh, this is not a true skirt. This is a skirt that is separated into two pantaloons that are pretty wide, and they flare out quite a bit. This photo is from the late part of the 19th century, so it was pretty daring by European standards. And this is in Persia. It's a little bit, let's see, it's to the right and down, so south and east of Europe. And this article, which I will share with you, this talks about how she was considered to be the most beautiful woman of her time. And I want to show you something else. So that was, we looked at something from several thousand years ago, about 5,000 years ago, and then something from about 140 years ago. And now I want to show you, these are images of funerary portraits made about 1900 years ago. And this is from Egypt. I want to share this with you. Okay. This shows us, this is a portrait of an Egyptian woman who is probably in about her late 30s, mid 40s when she died. And this is how people felt folks should be portrayed at this time in the second century Egypt. What I think is interesting about this is we looked at men who were wearing the king, most masculine man of his country, was wearing a feathered skirt. We looked at the Persian princess who wore revealing skirts that showed her she had a little bit of fur on her legs, a little bit of fur on her upper lip, and she had a carefully manicured single eyebrow. And then we have here, this is about 1700 years earlier. This idea of beauty is a little bit closer to what we're comfortable with generally today. I say we, culturally, this is what's expected, or closer to what's expected with versions of beauty shared on advertising platforms. So my point being that ideas of beauty and gendered dress gendered costume, I should say, alters from culture to culture and time period to time period. With self-portraiture, what we're looking at is basically a snapshot or microcosm of what is going on culturally at that time, coupled with the individuality of the artist. And there's a video, I don't know if I want to watch the whole thing with you. It will be in the module so that you can watch it yourself. We'll touch on it a bit. Let's see, I'm going to share this. There we go. And I'm pretty sure you'll be able to hear the sound.
Was until 1939 a Mexican painter known for being the wife of Diego Rivera, a predominant Mexican painter worldly famous for his murals. However, after achieving international fame, she returns home, divorces Mr. Rivera, and goes on to paint a self portrait in male clothing with her hair cropped. And this is how she chose to portray the changes in her life and how she saw herself then. Of course, knowing somewhat of her work, we know that her many self portraits are filled with symbolism. But this example opens the door for today's video. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of self portraits as ways to deal with our identity, which is the word we give to this constant self discovery journey we live throughout our lives. And so, with that being said, welcome back to another video. And today, as you might have understood by the intro and by the title, thumbnail, etc., we're going to be talking about self portraits, and we're going to be talking about the importance of self portraits, reflecting on like certain issues more or less related to photography, to psychology, to philosophy. And I'm going to be sharing my self portraits, talk about some of my motivations behind them, and also talk about very interesting concepts such as a visual diary, the creation of a visual diary, and talk about some inspirations as well and what led me to do it and how can it.
Okay, I'm going to stop her, and we're just going to click through this rather quickly. Self-portraiture is really interesting, and um, when you work on your own stuff for this class, you can do self-portraits with photography or whatever medium you choose. It doesn't really matter to me. Uh, but I think photography is a really fascinating portrait medium. It's relatively recent. But what is interesting about it is Frederick Douglass, who was the most photographed man of the 19th century, said that the remarkable and amazing thing about photography is that it allows absolutely anybody the capacity to create a portrait, to create a view of themselves exactly how they expect and want other people to see them. It is not a view of themselves that's thrust on them. It's a view of themselves that's created, which I think is really an interesting way of looking at this. Uh, there's a lot of issues about uh, identity and identity exploration that can be addressed through a self-portrait that may very well not be as effectively viewed or addressed in other media. And this is a really good video. Some of these portraits I think are really interesting, and I think that they're valid and good from using the medium of photography. Sorry about this. I don't. It would be so wonderful if I never got the ads with YouTube. But so she does show quite a few of these, and I think there's some really intriguing ideas that she uses. I like this idea of the picture of a picture, where the photograph itself has a specifically uh, identifying context, and then it's set into a different context or a different version of the original context. I think that's really kind of an interesting idea. Uh, there's also she touches on the idea. Rembrandt did several portraits, self-portraits during his life as well, and a lot of artists during the Renaissance and Baroque periods, and then as we come closer to present day, would do self-portraits as um, to be shown to demonstrate their capacity when uh, private investors or private collectors may not want an image of themselves to be shown around in gallery settings or at shows. Self-portraits of by Baroque and Renaissance artists could be shown everywhere to demonstrate to potential clients that they really knew their stuff. And Rembrandt did like 40 or 60 of them, just a whole bunch. And some of these I think are really interesting. We'll go back to them. But the idea of taking a photo of your shadow as a self-portrait is really interesting too. And we're going through this video rather quickly, just as an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Now here's another short video that talks about the history of self-portraiture. And there are some really fascinating things going on with portraits. This portrait with two circles, self-portrait with two circles, is a famous one because of the enigmatic symbolism. Nobody is quite certain exactly what the two circles symbolize. This is a famous kind of trope with the eyes wide open. Salvador Dali did a number of portraits like this. Some of the Baroque artists, when they were doing self-portraits, some of the women artists in particular, this is where they would have very specific lighting that would be a little bit dramatic, just a touch. And this is when artists started having using a relatively contrived pose, where in a little bit earlier during Renaissance, the pose would be something that perhaps looked a little bit more naturalistic. During the Baroque period, the self-portrait pose would be something like a moment caught in time. And then my suspicion is that this probably comes more close to age of the Enlightenment. That's when it was a manufactured pose, and then you get into Romanticism and realism as well. But I'd be I would be surprised if this was not done in the 18th century because of the way that it's posed. And then this is a self-portrait by Albrecht Dürer. Then there's also, amongst these self-portraits, there are also portraits where perhaps the artist used themselves as the model, and they were portraying somebody else, like an image of Jesus or Mary. We know that this is a saintly individual. It doesn't have a halo, but we can tell it's a saint or meant to portray a saint because of this particular mudra here with the hand is what is used by many by Christians to denote a blessing. There's sometimes in paintings like this, you'll see like in Mughal miniature paintings, large scale mural paintings, a lot of the times the artist will place themselves right here looking back. And sometimes they will put one of the patrons or donors in one of these positions, so that there'd be a portrait of a donor as well. You see this quite a bit. This, I like this. This looks to me more like from Baroque era because it looks like she's actually moving. And this is an image, this is an action self-portrait of what looks to me like a Renaissance or a late Renaissance or early Baroque painter. And then this, here's another woman. I'm pretty sure I recognize who she is. And she was part of the Baroque era. She was a contemporary to Rembrandt. There's Van Gogh. Oh, all right, there we go. He did a lot of portraits, Van Gogh did. And it's kind of cool because when people do a lot of portraits throughout, self-portraits throughout their lives, you can kind of see what they're going through. Van Gogh as a young person, as an older person. Rembrandt or Rubens is in different portions of his life. And the women that we saw earlier, it was perhaps more common than people expect. There were at least 20 or 30 women Baroque oil painters that we can talk about, Baroque and late Renaissance, and several Enlightenment era women painters, and then moving up closer to home, there there were significant ones. What's fascinating is that after they died, sometimes teachers or students would sign over their names with their own. And so without the advances in um, X-ray photography, some of these would still be up for debate as to what was going on. Some of the things I want you to pay attention to is that Albrecht Dürer was very much a product of his time. And look at the way that he's wearing the clothes that he's wearing too. And dress changes quite a bit. This woman was exceptionally talented for still lifes, I believe. Did some really very solid work. And it's not, these women painters were not, they didn't miss their fame necessarily for their time period. Some of them were quite well known and sought after quite a bit. Some of these women Baroque era painters had art schools of their own where they were teaching people. One of them, their husband was a stay-at-home dad because his wife was out traveling, doing portraits at homes of famous and rich people quite a bit, or spending a lot of her time at the school that she started. We just don't hear awful lot about that, and I think that more often than not is a factor due to the people that were sharing the history as opposed to what actually happened. And I think it's interesting looking at the different people that are doing self-portraits. They portray themselves very much in the style of the art that they are selling, for one thing. And they also portray themselves, I think we can pretty confidently say that they're probably portraying themselves really accurately with a lot of skill, because these are essentially expensive calling cards. I mean, these are business cards. These are the things that would be on display or that you would send to somebody to show that you could do their portrait or the portrait of their family. And I love the fact that you see the same skill and mastery in these women's portraits as you do in the men's portraits. And the reason why that's so important to me is that there is this kind of idea, well, maybe the women weren't known because they weren't as good. And that, I think, we can, looking at these portraits, we know absolutely that is not the case. These women artists stood toe to toe with their male counterparts. They were masters in their own right, and they had schools in their own right that the wealthy nobles were clamoring to get into to learn how to paint. So they really knew their stuff. Now, this video talks a little bit about how artists explore their identity. And I'm not going to watch it too much, but Frida Kahlo keeps showing up for a number of reasons. She was a woman in a field that was heavily dominated by men. She was an indigenous woman in a field, again, heavily dominated by men that identified or linked as much as possible culturally to European culture. And she was a woman who did not want to distort her life and her form into the culturally accepted idea, quote unquote cultural ideals of her time. And most of her output, numerically, her paintings consisted in a significant part of her self-portraits. She was dealing with her own issues of identity. And I think that's absolutely, but that's why she keeps showing up in things where we talk about just portraits in general. So it's not a Frida Kahlo fan video necessarily. It ends up being like that because she is so important to the field of self-portraiture. You know, when we look at other images of Frida Kahlo, she sees herself very obviously as a woman. She knows she's a woman. And it's fascinating to me that she would choose to portray herself wearing men's outfit and short hair. And she's living in a time period where that is very specific. The short hair is very specific to men, and this type of suit and shirt are very specific to men. And so what we heard just a little while ago, and this was after her divorce to Diego Rivera and her return home, she's recollecting her self-identity. And my thought, from what she did is, I'm thinking she is showing that it's okay to kind of find yourself when you need to. And later paintings shows herself wearing women's clothing, and she did identify herself as a woman. So I think that this is just, this is an opportunity that she used to explore alternatives of life. What was life going to be like in the future without Diego Rivera as her husband? She's holding a pair of shears to cut off her hair, and she's doing things that specifically challenged cultural expectations in this. So I wonder if she's also talking about, I got a divorce and I'm dealing with it, and I'm going to find myself. Here's another artist, Glenn Ligon, who tried to explore himself through creating self-portraits from other people's perspective, which is kind of interesting, but that's what he did. Asking for short phrases describing him from people that knew him. What is interesting is that this is a series called Runaways, where people use descriptive paragraphs to create portraits identifying runaway slaves, which I think is really interesting. And well, that is the style. And this artist, Glenn Ligon, used that as a way to describe himself. So these are his experiences, are his expression of self-portraiture, which I think is absolutely fascinating, where he's taking 200-year-old imagery and phraseology and using that to develop self-portrait. So I think that's really amazing too. So be sure and look at this. I think it's really fascinating video as well. Now we are going to watch this one. This is just a very short video on why do artists make a self-portrait? And this is really addressing the individual who's watching this, but I think it's valid for whoever is looking to make, or whoever historically made self-portrait. I think this is valid as well.
I think the painting that I respond to the most is probably the Rembrandt Artist in his Studio, where it's the young artist before he becomes wildly famous, and it's a painting that's all about potential. You're looking at the back of this painting, you don't know what it is. He's kind of glaring at it. He's not really inviting you into the studio as a lot of these other portraits are doing. I mean, every time that I'm about to start a new picture, I have the same kind of it's terrifying when you see a blank canvas. Is pretty terrifying, even if you know what's going to go on there, even if you have a drawing on it. And so you can see him kind of feeling this sense of fear at having to create something, and it has to be good because this is how he makes his money. And so the pictures that he makes become really important in the way that they're viewed by society as a whole, and his status within that society. Well, I think the De Heem is also in the same way that the Rembrandt, it's an artist looking at his work and not thinking about the audience, or at least not directly addressing the audience. Whereas the Schalken and the Dao, both of those pictures are an artist who is totally, they've made it. They're wearing really nice clothing, and they're more inviting you less into their studio and more into their mind, because they're in this kind of tight composition where they're surrounded by all of their collections, because they, like you, the collector, are also a collector. We are on the same page. We are at the same hierarchical status within the society. My process is probably similar to how artists have always worked, and just the way the artist's mind works. My pictures, however, are, I think, a lot different in the fact that back then you're making pictures about power, and a portrait was about power and somebody's ability to have representation in space, whereas my pictures are more about vulnerability than they are about power. I try hard to portray the white male body in a position that it's generally not portrayed in pictures, which is, it is not heroic and it is not powerful. We don't know who the picture is of. We just see a body in a place that they might not necessarily want to be, or might not be how they want to be portrayed. I'm still pushing around mud on a colored mud on a flat surface, and it's, you know, it's one of the most ancient things there is, and it's wonderful that this ancient medium can tell so many different stories.
I wanted to share this as well, where it's a conversation about identity, sharing identity through portraiture too. I really like this discussion. We're not going to watch the rest of it. You can do that. What I like about this, oh, you guys didn't even see that. I forgot to share the tab. Oh, okay. Sigh, you were wondering why I was so quiet. This individual is a teacher who takes children or youngsters in her classroom, and she invites them to create these identity portraits where she has them draw an image of themselves, put a line down the middle, color that the way that they want to view themselves, you know, relatively realistically perhaps. And on the other side, just go crazy with sharing their self-identity markers. And this could be whatever it is that helps them build up a picture of who they are in their mind, a mental picture. And what I like about this is that she explores ideas of there are visible and invisible markers. Now, if you're going to be using a visual medium, how do you share the invisible markers? It's probably a lot easier to share visible markers than the invisible ones. Most people can tell what you look like physically, but there are things like you would never be able to tell from an image like this How many people are in this individual's family? You know, what religion are they? How many books have they read? What TV shows do they like to watch? Are the TV shows or books that they've consumed, are they, do they feel they are part of what makes up who they are? Are these things that they actually enjoy? How many pets do they have? What's their job? And those kinds of questions, I think, are every bit as much about who we are as an individual. But if you're an artist trying to create something so people in the future or people outside of your media experience can tell who you are, how do you symbolize those kinds of invisible markers to create your identity or to share your identity? I think that that's a really worthwhile conversation. And this article is a really nice one, which gives several different ideas about self-portraiture. Now, we're leading into an exercise. This week's reflection is going to be a little bit different. And I'm thinking you can either make your own portrait or talk about another portrait that is not one of the things we've seen in class. Sorry, I'm sharing this article now. You can make take a photo of yourself. You can use a medium to make an image of yourself, addressing these ideas of self-identity. And you can try different techniques to come up with an image, you know, using your phone or whatever. Or I think the other thing is you can find a self-portrait that somebody has done anytime in the last 6,000 years and apply the 4 tools of artistic critique to it, and you know, like a full examination of what it is. I think that would be, both of those things could be, you know, either way you could do it. But if you're going to take a portrait of yourself and, you know, make a photo or a painting or an image of yourself, what you need to do is really express, be aware of your self-identifiers and try to share as many of those self-identifiers, visible and invisible, as you possibly can in your portrait. I think this is a really excellent image for a number of reasons. So you would go through, read this article about the different tips and see how much you can incorporate in your own portrait. So you either make your own portrait where you share as many of your visible and invisible identifiers, self-identifiers as possible, or you would do a detailed evaluation of a portrait, a self-portrait that's done that is not one of the ones we're looking at in class. Now, the idea of gender in this is something that historically it's been a lot easier to show this as part among the visible identifiers. Like we saw the Baroque, Renaissance, and Enlightenment women artists were expressing their gender through their clothes, as were the men. And we can see that because we have a pretty good idea of what those clothes represented gender-wise, what those costumes represented gender-wise in those societies that they come from. This isn't always the case, though. And that's why I think that this is a really good article to read, because it reminds us about the identifiers used for gender in art. And the first portrait we're going to look at is, this comes from basically a tradition of portraiture that in Egypt, right around the 2nd century, between 100 and 200 AD, where people would use tempera, usually on boards that were markers. The way that somebody would be buried at this time is the individual, after they died, would be buried in such a manner that their bodies would be stripped of flesh, essentially. So buried in the ground so that worms could eat the skin and muscle. And then their bones would later be taken up, cleaned, and put into something called ossuary boxes. And then the boxes, depending on what they were made out of, would either be painted directly on a portrait of the individual whose bones, who were represented by those bones, would be painted directly on the box. And this was, in that case, it was usually encaustic painting. Encaustic is where the pigments are applied with wax, so that it would soak into the porous material. And sometimes these would be paintings that were done in an area where the bones were stored, outside of the boxes. You would purchase a tomb space where people in your family, their bone boxes would be stored or buried. So it's kind of an interesting tradition, similar to today's concept of mausoleum, with urns filled with ashes, similar to that, except for the most part, a lot of the times it's just the name and dates and perhaps a very short phrase that's buried with the individual's ashes today, rather than these really beautiful individual portraits. Now, if we look at these portraits, these are all images of young women. And this, a lot of the times, this is validated because of other identifiers around or within, buried within the bodies around where these paintings were discovered. And culturally, this kind of jewelry was worn by women. These are outfits that women would wear. So there's no reason to think otherwise, that these portrayals that read as women are of people that are any other gender. There's a really good chance that all of them are women. Now, this is specifically from the Met. And I want to look at this a little bit more closely. Hopefully, yeah, we can get it a little bit bigger. Okay, good. Now, this is interesting to me. First, the painting has survived so well. This is almost 2,000 years old. There are a couple things that I see going on where the face is very clearly defined. Right in here, a lot of energy is taken by the artist to define this, for the most part, as realistically as possible. Now, these eyes are just about 10% bigger than normally they would be. And looking at the skulls of these individuals, it looks to me as if the cultural standard was to paint the eyes sometimes just a hair bigger than what they would normally be. And we look at, the hair framing the face appears really naturalistic. Right around here, it's very naturalistic. And then here, past the face, it starts spreading out and becoming more abstract. Here, I don't know what that originally looked like. My suspicion is that perhaps this is gold leaf that was applied. I don't know. But it is interesting to me that this area right around the face is incredibly naturalistic, almost photorealistic. And then as you move away, particularly down here away, then the paint shapes become more and more abstract. I don't know how much of that is specifically a result of age, because this thing is 1,800 years old. But my suspicion is, because I've seen it consistently, my suspicion is that the portrait artist would spend a lot of time and detail painting the individual as if they are alive and focusing on their face, and then kind of making things more abstract as they move away from the actual person's face. It is startling how realistic this is. The only things that belie that, like I said, are the size of the eyes, and sometimes the eyelashes underneath the eyes are a little bit stylized. But that could very well be that is the style of makeup at the time. Right through here. Perhaps that is what they're doing with the makeup. And at this time as well, makeup was used sometimes by both genders. Well, both principal genders, both common genders. For various reasons, perfume was worn by most everybody. Clothing and hairstyles, though, were specifically different, and many times different makeups were used, or makeup was used differently by the men and the women. I'm trying to get to something that we can look at here. And there was an ad that popped up. I hope you didn't hear that. Now, this is a rather fun video that talks about these portraits that were found all around Egypt. It was, like I said, it's fairly common in Fayum, in this area, for about 150 to 200 years, for a lot of people to have these kind of funerary portraits done. And this is how we get a really good idea of either how people actually looked like at this time, because it is so naturalistic, or how people wanted to be remembered. And that is something that is really important to think about as well. How did people want to be remembered? Do they want to be remembered with perhaps different eyelashes than they had, or different hairstyle? Was it culturally appropriate to darken or lighten your skin? And there are examples of cultures where showing different skin color was appropriate. In some branches of Hinduism, people will paint themselves so that their faces are yellow or blue. And so that, you know, that's not an impossible thing. Perhaps people were wanting to have themselves portrayed in different ways. But my suspicion with the consistency of coloring is that there's probably a really good chance that this is actually how people looked at this time. And there were several of these portraits that we can look at, and they are really very, very interesting. We're not going to listen to this. I just want to watch it a little bit. Now, I'm sorry. What did I do? Okay, here we go. I want to look at this rather closely and just examine it with you. These kinds of earrings, this is a 2-pearl type earring, and this kind of necklace. Again, we can see that right around the face, it's very naturalistic. And even though there's a really high probability that these stones are the same as these stones, or the pearls are the same in both necklaces, because the shape is there, more energy is spent on the color and highlights for this as here. Now these eyes are a little bit closer to naturalistic proportion eyes. And this is a strong enough detailed portrait that if this individual was walking anywhere near you, you could probably identify who she was. I think that's pretty amazing to me. Now, there are some markers here that I think, you know, we can help to identify that gender identity, specifically female gender identity, was of value, if not to this individual, which I think it probably was, but to the family who had commissioned the portrait after she passed. This woman appears to be somebody who is between 17 and 20, I would guess. The features are very clean and healthy. It looks to me like if she is being portrayed as wearing makeup, the makeup is subtle enough that it's designed specifically to make her look naturally herself, as opposed to exaggerating anything. But you know, that is complete judgment call. I honestly don't know for sure about that. But the jewelry that she's wearing is elegant and understated, even for the standards of that time. There's a delicacy and consistency about the jewelry. The hair is consistent to a relatively standard expectation of hairstyle at the time. And I think what we're seeing is a really pretty naturalistic view of what a person of her age may have looked at like at that time period. Now here, I want to look at, this is a famous portrait, Leonardo da Vinci self-portrait. This is fascinating for a couple of reasons. And I'll talk about them a little bit. In self-portraits, whether or not it's conscious, I think we do share an awful lot, sometimes more than we intend to, about who we are. And I wonder how much of that is going on with, you know, Da Vinci was so controlled and precise in most everything he did. But this was done in a notebook. I don't think he really intended to show it to anybody. So I wonder if that means that maybe this is a little bit more honest about how he viewed himself. With the facial hair, I think it's looks to me like it was something that he valued. You know, he had significant facial hair and he was happy of it, because you don't see his neck or clothing or anything like that outside of the beard. The lips are set in a fairly staunch way. It looks to me like his mouth is maybe not quite clenched, but closed tightly. The features are a little bit on the craggy side, which perhaps reflects his own view of his own masculinity. I really don't know if we can speak too much to that, because we don't really know what a lot of the conventions were at the time outside of the idealized portraits that we see of people. And those do seem to be consistent with hallmarks of masculinity that were commissioned by the people who were patrons of the arts. And the strong eyebrows at this time, the feminine idea of beauty was not to have bushy eyebrows, but it was perfectly appropriate for a man to. Wrinkles, again, at this time period, a lot of women did not have their portraits taken showing wrinkles, significant wrinkles, but this is perfectly fine and appropriate for a man. The exceptions being perhaps for somebody who valued their role in society as a wizened leader. There are examples of portraits being painted to show the person as being actually older than they are, which is kind of interesting. So there are some hallmarks here that I think where Da Vinci was intentionally expressing his masculinity in a visible way. This is an example of the portrait that isn't digitally cleaned up. Seems to show a lot more spattering and stuff around here. Now this is actually done with chalk on paper, which means that since chalk doesn't have an awful lot of material in it to stick it, to get it stuck to the paper, particles of chalk will come off or wear off. And that's where you get the spattering from. I see, but it looks to me like this is fairly detailed. It would not surprise me if this was pretty realistic to how Da Vinci actually looked. So I imagine it was probably pretty close. And I included a video in this as well. It's a TEDx talk or TED Ed talk by somebody who has studied the face of Leonardo da Vinci from those chalk portraits, or from that chalk portrait. And it's interesting how he talks about this, because he also talks about Leonardo doing self-portraiture through a number of years. And he shows other artists that did self-portraits. I think that one is really fascinating when you get a chance to look at it. Now, Sophonis Anguissola was a late Renaissance painter, and she's a woman. She was remarkable as a Renaissance painter because, again, like I said, she was a master painter who stood toe-to-toe with any of her male contemporaries. She was also a remarkable painter. And in this, we can see her actively using a bracing rod to help support her in the process of painting. But this individual, she was very adept at making naturalistic looking portraits. And so my thought is that this is probably a pretty fair assessment of how she looked. And what's interesting to me is that in this portrait, we don't see a lot of value given to the female costume popular in her time and place. What we see is she is wearing a very similar outfit, undershirt and smock, to her male contemporaries who were also professional artists. She is a professional artist, and she was very successful. So my thought is that this is probably pretty naturalistic. And it's interesting to me that the extemporaneous or extra markers for femininity seem to be missing from her. And the reason why I say that is, you'll look right here, this is supposed to be a woman in the painting that she's doing. And this woman in the painting is wearing a different set of types or different kinds of clothing. She's wearing significantly feminine clothing. Her hair is done in a very feminine style. It's flowing down on her back. And Sophonisba is portraying hair. She does have long hair that is standard for women in her society at that time, but it's tight up against her head and braided tight so that it's out of her way as a painter. And again, like I'm saying, said, she's not exhibiting any of the exterior costume cues that are consistent with what women will wear in her time period. And she's holding her paintbrush like this, she's holding the bracing rod like that. It's obvious she knows what she's doing, which is not intended to sound condescending, but it's important in this context because this is a demonstration piece to show potential donors that she does know what she's doing. Holding her tools in the proper way, having her palette in the proper way, having the paint in the proper way, showing the painting that she knows what is expected culturally for these kinds of portraits. This kind of biblical or pagan style scene, it's important that she shows them correctly because this is her business card, essentially. So I think it's fascinating, the stylistic choices that she made that I believe were consciously made to portray herself as a successful and functioning professional. And so this is much later on in her life. Anthony Van Dyck did a portrait of her later. This is significantly earlier. It looks to me like this is about 60 years earlier when she did her self-portrait. So probably when she's in her mid-20s, something like that. And then this is when she's significantly more mature. But I think this is absolutely fascinating. And then this is a miniature self-portrait that she did as well. It looks to me like she's even a little bit younger. But this kind of collar is one of those things that it's not entirely gender specific, but again, she has that very tight to her head hair. And this does not portray her in a professional setting. So perhaps she's a little bit more free with her clothing, but she's still portraying something very naturalistically. And then this short video shares about that a little bit about that. This video overall is about 5 minutes long, and it's a discussion by Douglas Hoggle about how she used her portraiture, her self-portraiture, to prove that she was a professional. So, an excellent perspective. And you can see for different clients, perhaps, or for different roles that she was applying for, she would dress differently. And I think that so very much feminine here. Very much the professional painter here. And then a rather different perspective here. So I think that that's really fascinating. And we can see with each of those portrayals of herself, she chose to exhibit different costume gender cues. Another individual that we'll be looking at came along a little bit later. This is Rembrandt. And he did an awful lot of self-portraits as well. And again, this is about 100 years after the young Sophronia that we saw. And he is doing this one is a famous portrait called Self-Portrait with Two Circles. And we see the one circle here and one circle here. It's kind of mysterious to a lot of people as to why he would be shown with two circles. What a lot of people don't know is that tradition holds that the one of the tests to be recognized as a master painter is to draw without the aid of any sort of drawing tool a circle of a specific diameter. And it was a test done because it was obvious that it was a circle if you did it correctly, and it was obvious that you got the size right if you did it correctly. And somebody without a lot of experience would have a much more difficult time than somebody with the experience. And to have two of those circles behind him suggests that he was somebody that masters looked up to, because he has two circles behind him. So I think that's rather kind of interesting. But that was something that was part of the guild system acknowledgement of masters involved tests like this that were tests designed to either show very easily that you succeeded or that you failed in accomplishing the task. And that's more in the realm of guild tradition. I don't know how much historical documentation there is to that. It's just that I'm friends with an individual who has been in a guild that reaches back to this time period. So, the guild is at least 500 years old. So that's where I got that from. So I think that's really kind of an interesting idea. But this is done when he is perhaps 60 years old, something like that. So he is an accomplished master at this time. Fabulously famous. Then this video shows different portraits of different individuals revolving around this idea of this Rembrandt self-portrait. And I'm thinking I might share this video instead. Perhaps both, maybe both of them. But this one is really good too because it is a dissection of one of the Rembrandt self-portraits. So perhaps I'll include that as well. And these are things where I don't expect you to watch all of these videos. I include them because I want you to have the options to, if you want to learn more about these specific artists, you can watch the videos and learn a little bit more about them. And now we're moving to India, which is interesting as well, because India, there are still very strong masculine and feminine expectations culturally and with costume. But what's fascinating is that they are not the same cultural expectations that are had or that are demonstrated in the West. So this is a famous painter from India, and I believe this is about 100, 150 years old. So yeah, it was done late part of the 19th century, and his name is Raja Ravi Varma, and he was as big as Rembrandt is in Europe. He was as big as that in India. Significant portrait painter and paint of all sorts of different people. If you were rich and famous in India during the 19th century, you had to have your portrait painted by him, essentially. And I am trying to get to the next. Oh yeah, okay. What is fascinating to me about Varma's style is that he feels to me like he is very much aware of the European tradition of the idealized romantic / realist styles that were prevalent at this time in Europe. Most of his portraiture feels like that. And then when he do his self-portraits, I'm pretty confident that he was very strongly aware of what he looked like himself. And he portrayed himself like a very strong and powerful individual. He did serve his government honorably. That's what that medal is for. And he was an established master painter. He knew very much how to do his craft. And there are some indicators here that I think are specific to India gender costumes, as well as responses to European gender costume. Right through here, the way he grooms himself is very masculine for India at this time, as well as Europe. This hat is specific to craft guild or arts guild individuals. At least I'm saying that just from my limited interaction from people who I've spoken to in the last 6-7 years. So it may be more contemporary from what I'm saying, but it seems to me that this is consistent with how painters and craftspeople viewed themselves. This jacket is something that is very specifically Indian masculine, the way he's dressed. We move down, the clothing flares out into a thobe or something like a skirt, but it is specific, so for Europeans of this time, it would look effeminate, but for Muslims and Hindus and people in India, this was a very masculine costume. And that's something that as we look at these, it really helps to learn a little bit about the culture of the individual who's being portrayed or who's portraying themselves, because they are going to portray themselves with cultural cues specific to their own identity. Here's examples of Varma's portraiture that he would do. And some of these are very much, very realistic. The this, like I said, it does feel a little bit like European romantic / realism, but you have a little bit of the Enlightenment aspects, European Enlightenment aspects going on too, with the columns and the posing, the light source. I think that that's really kind of fascinating. But it feels with the flowers and the outfit that the individuals are wearing, this seems very consistent with this kind of idea of romantic / realistic styles that were prevalent in Europe at the time. They were really strong. We're just moving in right before Impressionism. Now, what's fascinating to me is that much of the time, when artists would portray plants in their paintings, sometimes it would mean nothing, but in high impact portraiture, this person is obviously somebody who is very significant to the culture within which she lives. And I'm going to say she, because there are costume cues that demonstrate that this person identifies as a woman and is probably a woman. With how realistic Varma would paint these kinds of cheeks and jawline imagery, that is consistent with the physiological structure of women. So I'm pretty confident this is in actuality a woman. But as I was saying, perhaps the flowers are picked specifically for articulate purpose, meaning something. I don't know what they would mean, but it wouldn't surprise me if they meant something specific. The sari is very specific to women. This is jewelry of somebody who is very well-to-do and very important in society. And of course, we have an emblem that shows her devotion to or support of Victorian imperialism. I'm not going to say imperialism, the Victorian government. So she has a medal there for her service as well. And we can look at these portraits and tell something about the individuals portrayed in them by how they're holding themselves, the costume cues, and these other different kinds of aspects. And so this is really rather cool, I think. He did more than just portraiture. He also did religious painting. I'm going to scroll back down here. This is one of his religious paintings from Ramayana, where somebody, a rather negative individual, is kidnapping a woman, and this is an animal that's trying to protect her, and he just sliced off a wing. This is from a religious text. It's not going to be biblical stories. It's going to be religious paintings from his own religious tradition, or from the religious tradition of the individual patronizing or commissioning the artwork. And then he's using more historically appropriate costumes that are meant to depict well, I'm going to say historical, not true. These are traditional costumes that people would wear. See, the men are wearing these long flowing robes that cover both shoulders. Women would traditionally wear the saris that like this, that would cover one shoulder if you're younger, sometimes both shoulders if you're more mature, but it is specifically different costume than the men. And these outfits are more consistent with a more contemporary outfit for men. The Mahabharata is very ancient, so it would be hard pressed for anybody to know exactly what people were wearing at the time that the story took place in the setting. But I think that's rather interesting. And so, I found a couple videos that to share other of his paintings. But I think that it's his self-portraiture shows somebody who's very definitely a man. Now, this is a famous portrait of Frida. It's called Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird. And this is one of her portraits that she did, again, as she's going through different changes in her lives. I mean, sometimes she would just do them because, but many times she does portraits to kind of share a little bit about what's going on inside of herself. She was almost killed in a car wreck, and she had several operations that were, well, it said that, 35 that were designed to help her with the incredibly painful condition that her body was in after the accident. And when she'll have a lot of thorns, a lot of piercing her skin, and this is symbolic of the pain that she's going through, that she struggles with on a day-to-day basis. And with the thorns, there are connections you can make religiously too. But what's interesting about this is that she did see herself as a woman. However, there are some cues to here where her femininity was not defined by cultural expectations. She did have a little bit of fur on her upper lip, and she did have what we call today affectionately a unibrow. She also had hairy armpits and hairy legs. And I'm not saying that as judgmental at all, but at the time that she lived in, these were specific things that she did not, these are areas that she did not shave or pluck because they were natural to her and that's who she was. And damn it, if you didn't like it, that's too bad. So she did view herself as very feminine, but she viewed that not as going against, how can I say this? Not actively seeking to destroy her culture, but actively seeking to portray who she was as a natural individual. Sorry, which I think is really kind of interesting. And I found, in addition to that, I found a couple other articles that talked about who she was, how she viewed herself. And then there's also a closer look video where they get into examining these ideas of the self-portrait with a thorn necklace and hummingbird a little bit more. And so I'm probably going to include both of those videos. But with her stuff, there are so many self-portraits that you can draw from. If you wanted to examine her in the assignment, you can find lots of different portraits to draw from. Now, one artist that I particularly enjoy is Ai Weiwei. I like his stuff. It really makes you think. He counts this as a self-portrait. This is an actual Han Dynasty urn. This is, there's not a price point you could put on this. It is one of a kind. It is 2,000 years old, and he is dropping it. And that's his self-portrait, these 3 images in a row. So this triptych is his self-portrait. Now this is really kind of interesting because it's a photograph, and he's photographing himself doing something specific. So the self-portraiture in this is, I think, more akin to how he wants us to view him as an individual, as a thinking person, as opposed to as a physical individual. The outfit he is wearing is rather gender neutral. He does have facial hair. He does identify as a man. And so there are some, the gender cues are not really necessary, I guess, because it seems rather obvious. But it is interesting to me that his clothing is specifically gender neutral. This is an outfit that is worn by both men and women in China. Now I'm going to go through the rest of this rather quickly because we don't have a lot of time left. So I have Guggenheim did a rather interesting article on that. And then we also have a video about Ai Weiwei and what he calls his appropriation art. Well, I think that's rather worthwhile. Then the last person we're going to be talking about is a guy named Yasumasa Morimura. And I really appreciate his work. He does identify as a gendered male. And it's interesting to me because what he will do is grow or shave off his facial hair and portray himself as famous figures from art. Van Gogh, Marilyn Monroe, different individuals, even Frida Kahlo. And he will take things that have become culturally iconographic self-portraits and put himself in, either painting himself in or photographing himself so that he looks like the individual that was being portraited. And his stuff, I think, is fascinating because he constantly gender flips with different expectations of what gender might be or visual gender markers. This is from a very famous painting. I think it's Manet's Olympia. And it's fascinating to me because he makes no bones. He is a man, but he is wearing the same hair and the same ribbon necklace as Manet's painting of Olympia. And he's shaved his legs. He's done specific things so that he fits into that portrait. And I think what he does is absolutely fascinating because he is constantly forcing people to acknowledge the fact that Yasumasa is Yasumasa and not easily trapped or identified in specific roles. Did I share this with you? Yeah. Okay. So this is him as Manet's Olympia. And so this is just a short visit about him. And we are almost at the end. And then another video that I want to share with you. So I think, so I'll put these up. I don't know if I'll be able to get everything online tonight, but definitely by tomorrow afternoon. And again, the weekly activity is going to be either making your own portrait or doing a very specific dissection using the tools of artistic critique of one of the self-portraits that exist out there that we did not look at in the class. But I think this whole journey is really kind of interesting. This is not a direct in-your-face confrontation about gender in art. This is more an exploration about how different artists view themselves and what are the visual triggers that help them express their visible and invisible identity points. So something definitely to think about. I hope you guys have a good week. Like I said, my computer is finally fixed and I should be able to get everything online. And I hope people are doing well in all the different activities that you're doing. We do have a couple students who are honor students who are looking at different projects to have this validated as an honors course. Please email me and set up a time so that we can visit on the phone, or if you are able to come by my office if you're on campus, I'd love to do that so we can talk about it more. But I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful weekend, and I look forward to talking to you next week again. Thank you very much for meeting with me this week.